Hello, welcome back to my channel. It has been a hot minute since I've uploaded a reading wrap-up, so we are basically going to cover all the books I have read since April, which is kind of a lot. Well, there's 16. There theoretically should be more to keep up with my Goodreads goal, but May was rough. May was our reading slump month, but we kind of made up for it in June. So I'm gonna go through all the books relatively quickly, so this video is not an hour long. Starting with the books I read in April. The first book I read was The Stolen Heir by Holly Black, which is kind of a sequel to the Cruel Prince series. It follows Oak, who is Jude's younger brother, about 8 years in the future, I believe, and he is going on a quest with the daughter of the Queen of Teeth, Surin, to try and take out the Queen of Teeth, basically, because she's evil. I really enjoyed this book. I gave this 4 stars. I love the politics of this world that Holly Black has created. It's so much more dark and kind of creepy compared to a lot of fae fantasy books. There's definitely next to no romance in this book. It is very politics focused. We get a lot of clever dialogue, betrayals, crazy things happening, but it is very like politics focused fantasy. So if you like a heavy romance subplot in your fantasy, you probably won't love this book, and you probably didn't enjoy The Cruel Prince either, honestly. It was really fun. I'm super excited to read the next one. I think it's coming out later this year, if I'm not mistaken, and I just love that Holly Black always writes really morally gray characters. And then the next book I read was The Housemaid by Frida McFadden, which I have a love-hate relationship with Frida McFadden books. I think this was the first one of hers I read, and I actually really enjoyed it. I gave this book 4 stars. It had some crazy twists, and she's a very fast-paced writer. Like, I read this book I think in like 4 hours. Like, I just devoured it in one sitting because I needed to know what was gonna happen. It's basically about this housemaid, shocking, who starts working for this like really rich family. She's just gotten out of prison, so she was really struggling to find a job, so she's like doing everything she can to keep this job, even though it gets progressively weirder and creepier and scarier the longer she works there. There was just so many things I would never have guessed in this book, and I really think it's a pretty good thriller to get into. There's a second book as well that is called The Housemaid's Secret, which we are going to get to. And then I read the entire Inheritance Game series, which the first series that I have in physical copy, and I love this series. It made me so happy. I still miss it. I wish that I could reread this without knowing what happens. This book follows Avery, who is a high schooler and is one day just left a billionaire's fortune that she's never met, and she has to go and live in his house with his family and his 4 grandsons. Sorry, Nash, I forgot about you. Basically solve a bunch of puzzles and riddles to get her inheritance. So this is like a very fast-paced YA mystery novel. There's a big romance subplot, a love triangle, but it's not like an annoying love triangle. It's kind of a fun love triangle, and I love the series. I loved it so much. I believe I gave the first book 4.5 stars. I gave the second book 4 stars, and I gave the third book 5 stars, which if you want a more in-depth review of each of those books, you can watch the reading vlog where I read it. This is like one of my favorite series that I've read so far this year. And then after that is when I read The Housemaid's Secret, which is the second book to The Housemaid, and I did not like it. I gave the book 2 stars. I honestly don't think there needed to be a sequel. This is where my love-hate relationship with Frida McFadden comes in. I feel like her writing is very fast-paced, but sometimes it just feels so like, honestly, like it wasn't even edited really. This book, I felt that so strongly. Like, one, I can't even really remember the plot, but it's our main character from The Housemaid working for another family because she kind of gains this reputation. I don't want to spoil the first book, but she gains a certain reputation that gets a lot of rich housewives to hire her for cleaning and other things. I don't know. This book I found a little bit hard to follow. You definitely have to suspend disbelief for this, which you do for a lot of like domestic thrillers, I think, but like this one specifically is kind of insane and not in like a fun way. It just didn't feel that well written, honestly, to me, which sucks, and I kind of feel like that's a theme throughout Frida McFadden's books, where they just don't feel like they have been polished. as much as they could be. And so the next book that I read was Happy Place by Emily Henry, and I cannot even put into words how much I loved this book. I read it in 2 days, and I originally read it on my Kindle, but I loved it so much that I immediately bought the physical copy, and I would love to reread it and annotate it one day. But I need like time before rereading this, because if you have read this, you know this is an emotional roller coaster. It is so much more than a romance. Like, I would classify this as literary fiction because Emily Henry takes you on a ride throughout this book. The romance is almost more of a subplot in this, I feel like. It basically follows our main characters, Harriet and Wynne, who were dating for 8 years and then engaged, and then they broke off their engagement, but they never told their friends. And they go on this trip to a cottage in Maine that they do every year with their group of friends, and they don't want to ruin it because it's their last trip before this cottage is sold, so they basically just pretend that they're still engaged with all their friends. Again, you have to suspend disbelief a little bit, but this is a heartbreaking book in the best way possible. The pain between Harriet and Wynne every time they're together, of these two people that love each other so much but like have so much to work through still and are hurting, is so rough. And I think if you've been through any type of breakup, like, this is gonna hit really hard. And also it really tackles themes of mental health and loneliness and adulthood and just growing up and realizing that you kind of grow apart from your friends and everybody's doing different things, and it's really hard to get everyone together, and kind of just dealing with that, which hit me really hard as someone that graduated university last year and is now working full-time and struggles to make any plans with anyone because all of us have jobs that work different hours, and it just kind of sucks. And it's a really big transition, and I love the thought that Emily Henry put into that in this book. So again, if you are in your 20s, if you've been in a relationship and it's ended, like, this book is gonna hit you so hard, but in the best way possible. So this is genuinely a 6-star read for me. I will do anything for Emily Henry. I'm obsessed. I love it. And this put me, which we are going to get into the biggest reading slump, because I had such a book hangover from this and from the Inheritance Game series that, like, I didn't want to read anything. So for the entirety of the month of May, pretty much, I read The Sun and the Star by Rick Riordan, which is part of the Percy Jackson universe, and this is about Nico and Will going to Tartarus, which is like the deepest part of the underworld, to save their friend Bob. I love that Nico and Will got their own book. It was really nice to get a lot more insight into their characters and their relationship, and it was really cute, but I found it a little bit cringy for the first like third of the book, I think, which I do not hold against this necessarily, because one, I am almost 23 years old and I am not the target demographic for this book, and I was in such an aggressive reading slump. So I gave this book 4 stars. I really enjoyed it, and once I got into Tartarus, I read it a lot faster. I think I've said this in multiple videos, I just love when couples go to hell together. My favorite trope. If you love Percy Jackson, I highly recommend picking this up. I think it's a good addition to the universe, and there's a few cameos from other characters in this book. The next book I read was Hooked by Emily McIntyre, I think. I could be making that up. Yes. Wow. Okay, so this is a dark Peter Pan. It's not even a retelling. The author at the beginning is like very clear that it is not a retelling. It's just like characters based on Peter Pan. So it's like a mafia romance, basically. It was my first ever dark romance that I've read, and I've heard that it's like a pretty tame dark romance compared to a lot of ones that are out there. And I give this book 3 stars. It thoroughly entertained me, but it's definitely, I don't think I'm a dark romance girly, but I read this really fast. I read it on a plane, which was risky because, oh my god, this book is spicy. Luckily, there was just my best friend on one side of me and no one else. It was an experience. I might read more in the series because there's like a whole series of these retellings but not retellings that Emily McIntyre wrote. I would love to hear your thoughts if you've read these, because I honestly struggled to review this. So 3 stars, solid 3 stars. The next book that I read was Meet Me at the Lake by Carly Fortune. I had very mixed feelings about Every Summer After. I am very anti-cheating trope. It just does not appeal to me at all. I don't really want to read about it. And not to spoil Every Summer After, but there is a strong cheating storyline in that. And so I was scared that this would have a similar trope, and it has a much more minor version of it basically. This is about Fern and Will, and they meet in Toronto for one day and they spend the whole day together, and then they don't meet again for 10 years, even though they promised that the next year they would meet at the lake. And Will just doesn't show up, and Fern is really mad, and she never stops thinking about him over the next 9 years of her life. And then he shows up at her inn at the cottage on the lake right after her mom has died, and Fern is like taken aback to see this man again. I'm slightly biased when it comes to Carly Fortune books because I'm from Toronto. I love reading about the city. I loved, especially in this book, the day they spent in Toronto. The way she described it and the beauty of it honestly made me want to walk around Toronto all day, even though I literally do that all the time. But she made it sound so much more beautiful than I feel like it is to me. And then also it's in cottage country in Ontario, which is actually very beautiful, and I have grown up going to my cottage, so I just love reading about that, and that alone makes this like a much more enjoyable book for me. This is very insta love, I feel like, because they spent one day together and they like basically fell in love. And so again, you have to suspend disbelief a little bit. I will say I love Carly Fortune's writing. I think she writes banter and chemistry really well. At the beginning, I was so rooting for not Will, but Fern's ex-boyfriend, because I think his name is Jamie, because he seemed great. And so I feel like that's also not a great thing if you're not rooting for like the main love interest. So anyway, I give this 4 stars. It probably doesn't deserve 4 stars, but again, I am such a sucker for the fact that this is based in Toronto. So, and the cover is so beautiful. And actually, fun fact, I got this while I was in Vancouver, and it is signed by Carly Fortune. I don't know if that's focusing. Which is really cool. Next, I read Never Lie by Frida McFadden. And you may be wondering why I keep going back to Frida McFadden, and that is because her books are so quick to read and also really cheap on Kindle. I think a lot of them are either Kindle Unlimited or Prime as well, if you have either of those. Never Lie is basically about this couple that goes to a house that they're thinking about buying, but it's really remote, like in the middle of nowhere, and they get stuck there in a snowstorm, and then they like start hearing things and seeing things moved around and stuff, and they find out that they are looking at the home of this really famous psychologist that wrote a book and then was like vanished and disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to her. This one I liked more than The Housemaid's Secrets, but again, the writing, it felt like, it literally felt like she wrote it into a Word document, like just used whatever Word had, like grammar, autocorrect, whatever, and then just published it. Like, it feels like nobody else went through this and edited it. The storyline was good. Again, I read it really fast. As soon as I got like into it, like 20% in, I'm pretty sure I read the whole thing because I was like, I need to know what happened. I will say I found the ending a little bit disappointing, but it's also a very interesting way to end a book. So one that you don't read in thrillers that often, I feel like. It was 3 stars, pretty average, an easy thriller, and something that got me through a book pretty fast, because at this point I was so far behind my Goodreads goal. So the next thing that I read is a series, and I read Kingdom of the Wicked, Kingdom of the Cursed, and Kingdom of the Feared, which is the entire trilogy. This book is about Amelia, who's a witch, and her twin sister, who is also a witch, was brutally murdered, heart ripped out of her body. No coming back from that, you'd think. And she tries to summon a demon to help her like solve her sister's murder, but instead she summons Wrath, who is one of the 7 princes of hell and known as the Wicked, who she has been warned against her entire life because they're evil. And so in this story, the 7 sins are personified as princes of hell. The first book I gave 3 stars. Again, if you want to watch a more in-depth review of that, I have a reading blog on it. It was pretty average. I had higher hopes for it, and I feel like our main character in this book really frustrated me. It kind of felt like she just did things and then they didn't work out, and then she never learned, so she just kept doing them, and there was no dire consequences for her actions. It's confusing with how much Wrath like cares about her, basically. So a lot of this was just like hard to believe for me, and there was no setting at all. It's in Sicily, That's all we know. It's not like described very well. The politics, the universe, the magic system, like none of that is really described in any detail, and you do not know what century this takes place in until literally halfway through the second book, and it's like mentioned in passing. So I believe it is in the 1800s, but this book gets crazy. Like the first book, very mid for me. I wasn't like in super rush to finish it, but I think I read it pretty fast still. But this book, insane. So much happens. And this is where I like fell in love with Wrath, because he's very classic fantasy boyfriend energy. I say boyfriend because it sounds weird to call like a Prince of Hell a boyfriend, but it's giving Rhys from ACOTAR, it's giving Castile from Blood and Ash, you know, like the touch her and I'll kill you vibe, super possessive, toxic, but really fun and fantasy. So I really got into the romance part in this book, and we definitely get a lot more of the setting, because in the second and the third book they're in hell in the Seven Circles for almost the entirety of it, which was way more interesting to me. As I said, I love when characters go to hell. Don't know why, don't know what that says about me. I feel like the second and the third book had a lot more setting description and also description of the politics and how like the magic works. So the second book I rated 4 stars, and the third book I think is probably 3.5. I feel like the third book went a little off the rails. There was certain things that kind of conflicted with things that happened in the first book, but then there's also certain things that explain things that happened in the first book. And I also feel like you shouldn't be that confused reading the first book and have to wait for the third book to figure out why something happened. And then the main mystery aspect of the first book, which is that like all these witches keep dying, is kind of just like pushed aside and ignored by the third book. But I loved Wrath. Amelia grew on me. It was a really fun series. I actually read it quite fast. And then the book I read after that was Heart of the Raven Prince, which is a Cinderella retelling with fae, and it follows our main character Ember, who lives with her evil stepmother and her evil stepsisters, and she's in this bargain until she turns 19 years old, I believe, where she basically has to do everything her stepmother says. And so she goes to this ball and she meets Prince Franco, who is the unseelie prince of the nation, and they fall in love, shockingly enough. However, this book was not for me. I gave this 2.5 stars. I really enjoyed the fae aspect. I enjoyed learning about the world and the politics. I think it was really interesting. It was very fantastical. It felt very fairy tale-esque, which is good because it's a fairy tale retelling. But the romance, I did not like. I did not care for at all. It was very insta-love. They spent probably less than 24 hours together over the span of like 2 weeks, and they were declaring their love for each other. And I felt no chemistry between them at all, and it made me cringe a lot, and I pretty much skimmed the last 20% because it icked me out. I didn't like it. And then the most recent last book that I have read is Love Theoretically by Ali Hazelwood. I am a big Ali Hazelwood fan. I liked The Love Hypothesis, I liked Love on the Brain, and I liked her whole Loath to Love You novella series. I will say all her books kind of repetitive, but I'm okay with it because I kind of know that going into it. Love on the Brain and The Love Hypothesis were very, very similar, and I did find that a little bit frustrating. I think this one is definitely more different. Like don't get me wrong, it's still, the man is massive. He's massive and he has a massive, you know, it's what you expected when you're reading an Ali Hazelwood book. You have to accept it, basically. This follows Elsie and what is his name? Jack Smith, to be specific, which is such a boring name, but he has a longer name that you find out in the book. Elsie is a theoretical physicist and Jack is an experimental physicist, and years ago he wrote this article that caused a huge divide in the physics community, so she immediately hates him, but he is basically in charge of whether she gets a job at MIT or not, which she really needs because she is making next to no money and she is diabetic and does not have health care, which is really depressing to read about. I feel like in this book, Ali Hazelwood tackled a lot more themes outside of just like a romance, like an enemies to lovers, academic rivals romance. Like our main character Elsie is like a chronic people pleaser, and you watch her kind of grow and learn to ask for what she wants, which is really, really nice to read and to see such strong character development. And we also see Jack develop a little bit, and there's the themes of mental health and struggling to make ends meet, and there's a character in this that is asexual, which is nice. Very, very side character. It's not really talked about, but it's there. There's a bit. And Ali Hazelwood to me writes such good banter and chemistry. Like, I always love her characters together so much, and I gotta be honest, the spice scenes in this book are great. I like that they're not like perfect. They're very like cute, awkward, cringy, realistic vibes, which is really fun. I literally read this book in one day. I read it yesterday for like 5 hours, and I was up till like 2 a.m. to finish it. It was such a good book to jump into after a ton of fantasy books. It was very lighthearted. Even if you didn't love her other books, I would recommend giving this one a try because I think it is definitely a bit more different, and her writing is just only getting better. I have been talking for half an hour, so I'm gonna stop now. Those are all the books I've read over the last 3 months. Oh, by the way, I gave this 5 stars. I don't know if I said that. I don't know if it's worthy of 5 stars, but I enjoyed it and it was fun, and I feel like the way it made me feel, like I was giddy, kicking my feet, deserves 5 stars. Anyway, that is everything I have read over the last 3 months. It has been a roller coaster. There have been a lot of very mid books, which kind of sucks. So if you have any recommendations for your favorite books, please let me know down below. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will hopefully see you in the next one. Bye!